We acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, the gathering grounds of many diverse First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps have marked this land and whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Hello, and welcome back to Research Recasted, the Knowledge Mobilization podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Howlett, and today I am joined by Lisa Shamchuk and Dr. Norene Erickson. Lisa Shamchuk is an assistant professor for the Library and Information Technology program in the School of Business here at MacEwan University and teaches undergraduate courses in areas such as library collection development, reference, public service, technologies, and research methods. As a former elementary school teacher and academic librarian, she has worked in various school, public, academic, and special library environments. Dr. Norene Erickson is an associate professor and has been teaching in the Library and Information Technology program in the School of Business at MacEwan University for the past 20 years, where she teaches business research and organizational behavior courses. Norene's research interests include emotional labor in public library work, library technicians' work identity, and role changes in libraries. She is currently on a sabbatical with emotional labor research as her focus. Together, Lisa and Norene have updated the guidelines for the education of library technicians, which won the Library Association of Alberta's Punch Jackson Award of Excellence in 2023. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really excited to get into your research as a personal fan of libraries and the services and all that they have to offer us. The question I want to start with first is, what is the difference between a librarian and a library technician? Because I know that's going to come up a lot today.
Right. I think if you go into a public library, you just assume that all those people walking around are librarians because that's the word we have, right, in our culture. But probably they're not. That's not who you're seeing. So our field is a little bit strange just based on our educational credentials, I guess. So actually, the government of Alberta kind of defines 3 levels of library workers. And the first is a library clerk who does some shelving and some other roles. And that's a high school diploma. So some people you might see around could be clerks, they could be pages. That's another word for them that we use in libraries, bookshelvers, etc. Then we have our library technicians, and in Canada it's a recognized 2-year diploma usually. And so they're doing a lot of public service work at the desk, helping you check out your book, running the story time in a public library, things like that. And then we have the librarians, which is a master's degree. So you'll notice we've jumped a classification. There's no bachelor's degree necessarily in our industry. So often you'll get your library technician diploma. Maybe you'll go complete a master's or a bachelor's degree, then you'll go and get your master's degree to be a librarian. And oftentimes the librarians are behind the scenes. They're the managers, they're writing policy, they're writing the programs, they're doing supervising, etc. So it's a interesting industry because you don't really see that when you go in. You just think everyone's a librarian.
Yeah, like I know for me, I didn't know all of the different. I knew that there were pages that do like the shelving and stuff. But yeah, you think they're all librarians, so that's interesting. I'm wondering, is there a reason why there's no bachelor's degree? Do you know?
There used to be.
Okay.
There was for a while. And the master's level is accredited by the American Library Association for North America. So that includes Canada. And so we've sort of followed the history of, all North American library, credentials. And for a time there was a bachelor's of library sciences, but the master's was created decades and decades ago. And there just didn't seem to be a need for that bachelor level. And I think the reason the master's took off is because at the master's level, when you're a librarian, you're sort of expected to have kind of a base of education. And so the undergraduate credential is actually providing perhaps some level of expertise in subject areas, just to have sort of that background in post-secondary, so that when you get to the master's level, you kind of have that foundation already. And then when you have your MLIS, then you're working on kind of more specific managerial, administrative, theoretical, higher level, sort of application of library work.
Okay, so basically you can get like your bachelor's in
Anything,
and then go on to get your master's.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes your bachelor's degree relates to what you end up doing, and sometimes it just doesn't.
Yeah.
It's just the way it works, I guess, yeah. And then, of course, if the librarian with the master's degree is working on those managerial sort of administrative things, you need someone in the library to do the stuff that the people see, right? And that's where our technician comes in.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, speaking of the education side, you both collaborated on updating the guidelines for the education of library technicians, which actually won the Library Association of Alberta's Punch Jackson Award of Excellence last year in 2023. Can you tell us a little bit of what that process was like? Like, how did the project start? What were kind of your roles?
I knew you were going to ask that question, and I was thinking about that. And the first answer to it is because nobody else was doing it. And I think Lisa and I have enough experience working in education for the library tech program that we thought, well, why not us? You know, somebody should be tackling these guidelines because it had been 10 years since they had been updated. They had been updated like approximately every 10, 15 years since 1962. So they're important guidelines for the industry to follow in the absence of us having an accreditation process. The master's level has an accreditation, so you get a degree and it's accredited by the ALA, American Library Association. The Library Technician Diploma Program across Canada, 14 schools? 14. They don't. So the guidelines are sort of like I guess that they kind of replace the accreditation process in providing a standard. So there's a generalized standard across Canada as to what to expect.
Okay.
So it was important that they were updated because we don't have any other guidelines to follow, you know, for education. And I think in order to ensure that libraries are recognizing that diploma credential, that diploma expertise, it was important to have something that was written down, you know, that was written down that everybody could follow, everybody could refer to. It gives it sort of a little bit of extra, you know, I guess, importance, right? So there wasn't anybody that was stepping up to the plate to update, and it is a huge project. And I would say that when our update is probably the most kind of academic approach. In the past, I think it was like people that would get together in a room and talk about it, and they might interview some people or do a little survey, but we really tackled it as a research project. So we did a lot of stakeholder engagement. So we did with a research assistant's help, one of our students, we did a complete scan of all the programs across Canada, gathered all the information we could find on the programs, details of courses, right? Course descriptions, everything. And then we did 3 different surveys, I think. One to library technicians in industry. What do you do in your jobs? What is your job, you know, expectations of your work? We surveyed the library programs across Canada, so the heads and the instructors in the programs. And we also surveyed library managers and supervisors of library technicians as to what their expectations are. What do their job descriptions look like? What sort of, you know, things are their library technicians doing in their libraries? And so it was a complete, you could call it an environmental scan of the entire industry. And so that's a lot of data and that's a lot of time.
Yeah.
So no wonder nobody else wanted to do it. But, you know, we kind of set it as our research agenda, and we had a fantastic research assistant. And, you know, with the help of all the data that we got and the help of other programs as well, we wrote it up, put it together.
Yeah, and so we were doing this on behalf of the Canadian Federation of Library Associations, which is the national association. So they're the ones who had the home of the guidelines. They posted on their website. So they had to then take what we had written, and the board had to pass it for us, which they did in 2022, 23, and now it's on their website. And one of the additional benefits of doing this project was that it had been some time since the instructors and heads of the programs around Canada had kind of gathered or talked to each other. So one of the additional kind of benefits that came out of this is that, okay, so we did this big research project, we got it passed by the Canadian Federation of Library Associations, it's on their website, and then we started talking to each other again, and we've had some meetings, and that's been a really nice thing that's happened for us. We just had a meeting a couple weeks ago, just a nice way to talk about our challenges, where are we the same, where are we different, and how can we share our expertise. So that was really nice for us as well.
Yeah. Yes. You mentioned how like they haven't been updated in years, and it's so important for especially education to consistently keep up with where we're at now. Like for me personally, I do a lot of my library stuff online. Have the guidelines been updated to kind of account for the new online space that the public libraries are taking up?
Yeah, incredibly. Yeah, we noticed a huge, the guidelines changed completely from 2011 for sure. And technology and use of technology in libraries, how the staff use technology has changed significantly over the last 10 years. So probably the two areas that changed the most, like on a grand scale of the guidelines, was surrounding technology. So the technological expertise needed to work with systems that are providing information, providing services to the public, right? Or to the users. That would be number one. And the second is a recognition of the social aspect of working in a library. Working with people of various backgrounds, various areas. They come at the library with so many different needs, and come in with a variety of societal issues as well. And sometimes the library is the only place they can come to for that information. So for example, a new immigrant coming to the library, needing help filling out a form, a government form, right? Someone looking for housing information. I was in an interview with the library manager just a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how they were trying to help someone who was a victim of domestic violence in the library on a Saturday. And do you know that there's no places open, no shelters are open on the weekend? So they're trying to figure out, what do we do to help this individual that is in a domestic violence situation and has come to the library as their only place that's open to help? This is the type of work that they're doing now, right? We're not just, hey, what book would you like to read? I mean, that is still important. But those sorts of issues now are becoming the forefront of working, at least in a public library setting, recognizing there's a variety of different types of libraries that our students could go into, right? Academic, special, school. But this is what we need to train them for. So the guidelines had to focus more on what we called the
workplace
skills, which is basically soft skills, or what are some of the characteristics that are needed in order to work in those sorts of difficult situations. So the guidelines, 10 years ago, they didn't really talk about that. They talked about excellent customer service, but not about empathy, compassion, trauma-informed practice, things that are really important to the type of people, I guess, the type of, society, I guess, that we see today coming into the library. And the needs are vastly different.
So updating the guidelines was just one step, right? We went through this big research project and updated the guidelines, but then more work now has to be done. Now that has to translate somehow into our curriculum. Right. So that's been the last couple of years. I know we've talked about it. We've updated some of our course objectives, our program objectives. And as I said, we're all talking to each other now, the programs, and I know they were just talking, we had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and people are talking about, updating our curriculum. How can we reflect these new competencies? So that's kind of the long tail effect of this project.
Wow. Because, you're right. These libraries have become so much more than just a place where people can go and take out books, especially public libraries. Like, I think it's a little bit different in a more academic setting. So like a library here at MacEwan is not going to be the same as a library like just in Edmonton, like one of the public libraries.
Yes.
I guess that really dives into your research focus right now, which is emotional labor and how we need to be able to regulate our emotions in order to do our jobs.
Right.
Could you speak a little bit about that emotional labor.
Yeah, and
aspects?
I guess that came from our work that we've done before the guidelines. Lisa and I both worked on, sort of changing roles in in libraries,
Yeah.
changing roles in libraries, and how library technicians and the librarian credential sometimes become a little bit blurred, right? Because the library technician, like you said at the beginning of this interview, you talked about how library technicians are sort of the person that you see, and now automation has taken over, checking out your own book out of the library and doing your own research and that sort of thing. But so the library technician role has evolved because they're not the ones necessarily checking out your book, but now they're the ones that are doing the storytime programs, that are helping in some of those frontline direct service opportunities. So we did some work with the changing roles, and I think from that, and that was what my dissertation was on as well. From that was just the recognition that there was this aspect of emotional labor that goes into the work, because we have expectations for excellent customer service and how we treat the public, but it can be very challenging because there's sometimes a disconnect with how we're feeling on the inside, right? Working with that domestic violence situation, for example, and you very well might feel genuine empathy towards the person and helping them, but you also can't break down crying with them. You've got to maintain that professional face, and there's an expectation that you're providing service for them. So that's the type of work I was interested in. That's the type of dynamic that I was interested in exploring. And my work is centered around public library work, because that's usually where emotional labor is sort of the most, apparent. But just looking at how libraries are changing and some of the challenges, looking at the news even. CBC did an article in August talking about overdoses at Toronto Public Library between 2022 and 2023 increased by 529%. So that's how it's changing, right? All of a sudden, all these library workers are in the library working innocently, helping people find books to read and doing story time. But there's an increase of 500% overdoses that are happening in the library bathrooms, on the library floor, right? You have to be trained for that. Yeah. And there's certainly a work going on emotionally in working with these individuals, working with people, doing your job, enjoying your job, but at the same time, having this trauma going on around you. It all sounds very dreadful. Like, I make it sound like, oh my God, why would anybody want to get into library work, right? Like, it's not like that every moment of the day. Mm-hmm. But there needs to be support systems in place for these workers to be able to navigate that appropriately. The organizations themselves have to provide support for library workers. We as educators have to provide training and an acknowledgement of what you need to be prepared for and trained for, right? Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into that, and that's really where the emotional labor research stemmed from, was wanting to explore that a little bit more deeply about those experiences of people that are working in frontline work in the library.
Yeah. Wow. And it's such important research too, because like those spaces have changed quite a lot, and they do have to deal with all of these things. And a lot of people don't really talk about what it's like emotionally to deal with that. They're just kind of like, oh, this is my job. I know I went through a job when I was younger. It wasn't a library, but still the same sort of thing. Yes. It was in a really bad neighborhood. So we had people coming in using the bathrooms for like all of that stuff. So like it's important. And I'm really glad that we have a team of incredible researchers to update these guidelines and to provide guidelines for training for that.
I think you're talking about public library. I was just, as you were speaking, thinking about how things have also changed in school libraries. I mean, now we have to prepare our staff to deal with book challenges and censorship and book bans. And how does that affect them, regardless of if they're in a city or a small town? How does it, affect them? Are they having different interactions with parents and principals in their town? So it kind of just goes everywhere, right? How can we prepare them for that in school?
Yeah, and that's another good thing. I did
tough job.
Yeah, I did a research paper not that long ago about book banning.
Did you?
A lot of what I found was mostly in the States, but it is like, for me, it's wild that you can see a book and be like, absolutely not. But I kind of want to go back because you guys were talking about how you had a lovely research assistant and you had all of these people helping, and now you have meetings and everything. You had mentioned a little bit in kind of like our pre-interview that what you want to explore in research is more of a community-based co-creation approach to research. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about this co-creation approach.
Yeah, I just finished a content analysis project where myself and my fantastic research assistant, again, one of our students, we looked at 4,000 articles just to see what's being written about. And most of the research literature out there is being written about academic libraries, because it's usually library faculty members at the master's schools or academic librarians doing the bulk of the research in libraries. So naturally, the bulk of the research will happen about academic libraries. But I was thinking, what if you're in a public library or a school library and you have a problem and you want to solve it? You want to do some evidence-based practice and find out what the research is saying to help you solve your problem or answer your question. Sometimes you can't turn to the research literature. Sometimes it's not there, specifically if we're in public and school libraries. So I've been in the initial planning stages with a school librarian to do some research, and she's interested in knowing what are the principal in the school, like how do they value library technicians? That's a very timely topic right now. If you're following the news, we have some collective agreement and some bargaining going on. And library technicians are part of that in the schools with the educational assistants and the custodians. So it's a very timely topic. There's no rule that says the principal has to hire a library technician. And, they deal with the money that they have based on the funding that they've been giving. So anyways, the school librarian, she's really interested in kind of figuring out like how do principals think about hiring for school libraries? But she's a school librarian in a school library, doesn't have a lot of time, doesn't necessarily have access to the academic databases that we have access here at MacEwan, maybe hasn't done research before or isn't sure about the research process. When librarians go through the master's degree, we have to take a research methods class. But if you've never done research out there, how are you going to do it? So where I want to go in the future is I want to maybe think about how can I work with library staff out in community to do their own research? How can I use my expertise with the research methods and my provision here that we have at MacEwan? We have a library full of databases with literature we can get access to. We have access to the research ethics board here. How can I use my resources to help someone in industry do research to solve their problem or find out information about their situation? So that's kind of where I'm thinking about going in the future. I'm just in the initial planning stages. So I kind of want to do some research as well. What do people in industry need? Maybe from a researcher or an academic. Is it the ethics board? Is it the ethics experience? Is it the time, etc.? So that's where I'm interested in going in the future. Hopefully we can get this off the ground. But my school library technician, she's very busy right now.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And possibly on strike.
Yeah, maybe.
there is that. Yeah. Do you find like with school libraries, they're like they need those technicians? Do a lot of them not have them?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's, there's no law that says in a school library you have to have a library.
Really?
It does say things about learning commons, but how a school uses their building and their funding and their staff to accomplish that, it's not necessarily, there's no guidelines for that. We should maybe write some guidelines for that, right? So it is an interesting situation in schools, and there's definitely an equity issue, I think. around. Some schools have fantastic, huge libraries, full-time staff members doing programming with kids, and they've got the best collections out there for them. And some libraries have a 0.25 person who comes in and shelves some books. So definitely an area that we talk a lot about in our classes, school libraries.
Kind of going off of that, you both have mentioned that you feel that library technicians are undervalued and underappreciated. Why do you think that is? Like, why are we not placing more importance on them?
Maybe it starts right back at the beginning of this interview, where if you walk into a library, you assume that everyone there is a librarian. I think there is, and I haven't done the research on this. There is some people who research things like this. It'd be interesting to read some of that. But part of it, I think, is the social cultural expectations about who library workers are. And society doesn't have the knowledge. They think everyone's librarian. So right there, if nobody knows that a library technician is a role that exists, we're already starting from that deficit.
I'll add a couple more. I think historically, libraries have always been hierarchies. I mean, we've always been structured as an organization that has different levels of workers in it, at least for the last, several decades, let's say. So there's an established hierarchy, and working within a hierarchical organization is sometimes fraught with that issue, right? Of a little bit of not sure who, sort of who does what, but also there's a ranking. There's kind of a bit of a ranking. And library technicians, as a 2-year diploma, have a different role to play than someone with a master's level education. And so that sort of automatically can, add a little bit of divisiveness, I think. And historically, it has added a bit of that divisiveness. So that's one reason that we want to do this research, and that we want to really showcase what library technicians are doing in libraries, because we want that valuation to go up. We want that value system to go up. And I think the other, and maybe this doesn't address the library technician sort of value, but looking at library work in general, it's always been considered to be what we call affective labor, right? Which is labor that deals with, it's like nursing, it's like teaching, it's like working with people and people's emotions and people's, and it's also been gendered, right? It's been largely a female-dominated profession. And so there's an undervaluing of the profession in the first place, historically, as a result of that. And so you add that together with this hierarchical organization, then you're going to see, some sort of conflict, happening with that.
Let's add in the funding situation, right? Most libraries are public services, unless it's a private library in a law office or a business, for example. And so where's the funding coming from? Is the funding going up? Is the funding meeting inflation? Is the funding getting cut? And so that plays into it as well. How valued are libraries in general in society? Never mind how valued are the staff members.
Well, I'm just like, that's a lot to unpack, because there's a lot of things that I would have never have thought, especially like, it being a female dominated everything.
Very rewarding work, right?
Yeah.
But and then there's always these issues behind the scenes that fortunately the public doesn't see. The public just goes to a library. The children go to a school, to their library. The students here at a university go to their library and they get what they need from it. But all of this is behind the scenes that nobody thinks about unless you're in the industry.
But and you can see that in other professions too, that you could, sort of synonymize with library work, like nursing profession, right? Female dominated profession, or has been. There's always been an undervaluing of that, right? Of the nurses versus doctors. The paralegals versus the lawyers, right? Teachers even versus principals, whatever. There's always sort of this, kind of this devaluing of a devaluing of certain professions just because of the historical nature of it, right? Which none of, which isn't right, of course. The work that nurses do, the work that library technicians do, the work that, paralegals do, any of those, our social, they're all important work, right? It's very important work, but it just tends to be maybe a little invisible, right?
Yeah.
Until things happen in the news and we hear more about these situations.
Right.
We've had a couple come up in the past 6 months with collective bargaining. So maybe it's becoming more in the forefront. Maybe we are going to see some more advocacy from the public as opposed to us advocating for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, also, like you guys coming onto this podcast, hopefully we can get it out and get a little bit more information out to people about this profession and bring at least a little bit more awareness to it.
Yeah.
I do have one last question for you guys before we wrap up. And it's just, do you have any advice for our listeners, for students, staff, faculty, really anyone? If you could give any advice.
Well, I mean, I feel like we've talked a lot about the challenging side of working, which may not be what people think when they think of working in a library, right? Oh my goodness, that's such an enjoyable job. We're going to be it's so idyllic to work in, and we've been, expressing some of the challenges and the reason that we're doing the research that we're doing. But I think it's also important to recognize what an incredible profession it can be. So I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from going into the profession for the reasons that we've described. There's challenges in every profession, right? So it's not, there's no different in that sense. And the reason that people stay in this profession and have long careers is because it's so very rewarding. It's so very rewarding when you are able to help that domestic violence, person. You're able to help that stressed out student in an academic library, help them, the relief on their face is you help them find the perfect article for their paper, right? In a school library, seeing the kids' faces light up when you're reading a book and, they come back and they're like, can you read that book again? Like there's so many rewarding moments of working with people and just making the world a better place. That sounds kind of contrite, but it's true, right? Like we're making the world a better place by being there. And that's why people come into library work and that's why they stay in library work. So I want people to remember that as well. We just want to help navigate that so it's a little bit smoother and so that they're recognized for the work that they do.
Yeah, I think at the top of the show, kind of talked about how when we were updating the guidelines, technology was very important for us, and also the people skills, working with people. So that's something we tell our students on the very first day. Great, maybe you're here because you like to read books. This isn't the profession where you're just going to sit and read books. You're really going to work with people and technology every day of your role in libraries. And if that is something that is interesting for you, then look at it, right? Come and look at our diploma, or if you already have a degree, work towards a master's degree, because it is very rewarding, whether you're in, school, academic, public, but also cities, rural libraries. It's very rewarding work with people.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that the opportunities for library technicians are quite expansive if you're willing to go outside the city, right? If you don't want the urban public library setting or you can't get into an academic library, rural public libraries hire library technicians quite often because there's legislation around whether you have to hire a librarian or a library technician. Actually,
in public libraries,
in public libraries, and so under a certain population of people, I think it's 10,000. You're doing the public libraries unit right now. Under a certain population number, the Libraries Act states, you don't need to hire a master's level individual. So that opens up the field for our library technicians to go in to be a library manager of a rural public library, right? So they can be the boss. They can do the hiring. They can plan the programs. They work with city council. They work with their public library board. They're doing high level work in those rural settings. So there's lots of opportunities outside of just the big centers.
It's an expansive industry, and we have to teach them all this in our program. This is what we had to capture in these guidelines, that particular project. So there's lots going on, always something, and it's always changing. When we updated the guidelines, this research was 2021, 2022. Nobody was using the word AI at that time. So someone's going to have to go and do another research project and update these guidelines again and
add in
think
something
about how do we
AI
work with AI in
competency.
libraries.
Yeah.
Constantly changing environment.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for being here with us today and sitting down and
bet.
talking about your research.
We're so happy to do that. It's not very often we get asked to talk about, our diploma program, which is actually one of the original diploma programs in MacEwan.
Wow.
It's been around for 50 years now, so still going strong. So we're very proud to be a part of it.
Yeah. And it's nice to do the research on this topic. Not a lot of people are researching about library technicians.
No, that's right.
So it's a privilege for us to keep collaborating on these types of research projects.
I know. And we're all grateful that you guys have stepped up to the plate.
You bet. Thank
in
you.
order to make education a little bit better for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have for today's episode of Research Recasted. If you want to support this podcast, you can visit Research Recasted on your favorite podcast platform to find new episodes every 2 weeks. Also, don't forget to check us out on Instagram, where you can leave us a like, give us a follow, or send us any follow-up questions you have from today's episode. This has been Research Recasted, a knowledge mobilization podcast brought to you by the Office of Research Services and the Faculty of Fine Arts and Communications at MacEwan University.